Hello everyone, this is Denise Wilbanks, and with me today is Saryon Michael White, a fascinating individual that I just came to meet not very long ago. We've become well acquainted, and I would love to introduce him to you. Saryon, hi.
Hi.
Just for the viewers' information, I want to let you know that a lot of your profile and your websites are going to be listed as a link right here in this viewing, so anyone can get to know you better in your background. But I do would like to know more about how is it that you got started in the world of spirit, and how is it that you got started, and what is it that kind of called you forward when you began to experiment with out-of-body experiences?
Yeah, well, I would say that there wasn't really so much experimentation as it was a happening that occurred. And there were a number of things that happened even earlier before the out-of-body experiences in my teens that started to kind of awaken me. Really powerful visions and dream experiences that I felt had to be something more than a dream. I felt like I was having contact with some form of higher guidance that was showing me things. So I had a lot of really vivid lucid dream experiences as I was growing up, and I started to learn about lucid dreaming, and I realized that I could do something with my mind that a lot of people couldn't do, that I could enter a dream state consciously upon going to sleep, and I could stay in that state for long periods of time. It's sort of like being able to practice holding your breath and expanding your lung capacity. You know, if you practice your breathing and you learn how to really oxygenate your blood in the right way, you can hold your breath longer periods of time. And so I somehow learned how to hold the dream state for long periods of time and to use that as a way of sort of investigating reality. So I was doing that even before I started having out-of-body experiences. But then I started to have encounters with beings. Like I had one vision of the Master Jesus where I felt completely pierced by his cosmic, radiant, unconditional love. And that's when I knew that I was being guided and that there was a kind of a spiritual experience unfolding that was going to educate me beyond what I could learn from books and religions. Although I did do a lot of research in the beginning. I read a lot about channeling and religion and spirituality and history, physics, everything. I was a very voracious reader in my teens. And then when the out-of-body experiences started happening, it was like I had a new research tool. I could use that ability to investigate reality. But the really interesting things, I think, are only complemented by what was happening with the out-of-body exploration, because I also started to get an education that came to me directly by angels and ascended masters and highly evolved extraterrestrial beings that just started showing up. I would lay down to go to sleep at night, and I would find myself hovering slightly above the body, and then an angelic guide would appear and would begin reading to me from a book that contained the records and the history of the whole world. And I would have holographic visions of things like the life and teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Muhammad and all kinds of spiritual history, things that had a spiritual impact on humanity's spirituality and our historical momentum towards a great awakening happening in this time period. So I got a very well-rounded spiritual education that I don't think a lot of people have had. I imagine it's pretty rare. And it has allowed me to kind of pierce the veils of illusion that have surrounded the scriptures and the revelations of previous dispensations of light on the planet, to see what was really going on, to literally see the timelines that were intended versus what ended up happening as dark forces and fear and duality crept in and began to corrupt the revelations that were sent down to guide us and protect us and, again, propel us towards the awakening that we're moving into now.
Well, so let me ask you, since you were simultaneously seeing these two aspects of reality in a way, what did it feel like to be in your skin and have that kind of a contrast so vividly displayed in front of you?
It's shocking, really, when you see what could have happened if we had stayed aligned with the original consciousness of the different revelations versus what happened. The differences are startling and shocking, and just it boggles the mind, you know, what might have been. That's why I wrote this whole series, which you see on my blog on one of the side panels, about the world that might have been, and it's all about what would have happened on these other timelines. And those other timelines are still a part of us. You know, even the revelation of Christianity that Christ brought, there are not just one or two versions of history, but many different versions of Christianity with different timelines and different potentials. And there are also different timelines that extend out of much older times, like in Atlantean times. You know, there's a version of Atlantis that didn't get destroyed and that fulfilled its higher potential. And those timelines still exist. They're still around us. We can still peer into them. That's one of the things that I've learned to do, although I would say that it's been, you know, largely assisted by angelic beings. It's not like I just sit around and go, oh, let's go look at this timeline over here or that one over there. I can have sort of a prayer or an intention to learn and discover and explore, and then usually that intention and that receptivity for new knowledge is then aided by the assistance of higher beings that can direct that inner sight in a way that's meaningful and that has relevance not just to me but to other people that I'm sharing these visions with.
Before we go on into, you know, any further discussions, it'd be interesting for you to briefly touch on how is it, obviously physics explains that the time is, you know, we experience time very slow, like a little slow motion, but time in itself does not exist, and that's why you're able to move back and forth. Go ahead if you can and explain for those that, you know, this might be a new topic. How is that for you?
Well, I had an experience once.
And I don't mean necessarily. Go ahead.
Well, there was a time when I was on a road trip, and I sometimes like to make spontaneous decisions, especially when I'm traveling, just to have a bit of a sense of adventure about things. And I was with these two friends, and we were planning on driving up California from the south to the north to go all the way to Mount Shasta. And we came to this point where the road was going to split, and we could take the back way that kind of goes up through part of Death Valley and into the mountains from the eastern side of California, or we could go up Interstate 5. And I was kind of torn, like, which way do we go? And we were getting closer and closer and closer to the fork in the road, and we couldn't decide, and we were undecided right up to the very moment, and then almost randomly I just chose to go right. And I want to say for about 5 minutes, we all had this visceral feeling that we could feel part of the other timeline branching off. So it was still resonating in our molecules. There were two different timelines, and then we reached a deciding point and we chose one, and yet our particles still remained entangled briefly with the other timeline. And of course that faded as our resonance was changed more and more by going further down one corridor of time versus another. But we could even hear ourselves having a conversation in the other vehicle on the other timeline as it was going down the other road. And we could feel both versions of ourselves talking about the fact that we could feel the other versions of ourselves on the other timeline. So there was a reflectivity there, and it was absolutely extraordinary. Fortunately, I was with people that were spiritually open-minded enough and intuitive enough that we all had a kind of a shared experience of this. And I can think of other dramatic experiences of this as well, but that's just one that's very simple and easy to understand. I think it is possible for us to be aware of the subtleties of the physics of the universe in that way, and to become more aware of our multidimensionality. You know, at any given moment, we exist as not just one personality, but multiple probable selves. So there are multiple probable versions of you that are connected with many different potentials inside you. And at any given moment, you are sometimes negotiating between different personalities and different timelines to figure out, you know, which aspect of your potential are you going to focus on next or first, or in a more intense way. So yeah, there's a lot to explore when it comes just to our multidimensionality.
And not to jump around the subject, but just because of, you know, where you are, one of the things that came to my mind is I teach, you know, coaching, and one of the things that we work a lot on is the aspect of resentments. And whenever someone has a release, you know, has a conscious awareness of some wrongdoing in any point of their life, and, you know, they go into a particular meditative state and be able to release resentment and say, you know, I'm sorry, and then forgive me. But what's interesting about that relates the time and timelines is that because there is no real thing as time, that travels back and can still affect a part of the body in the past that transfers over to the present in both instances, meaning the person that is in resentment as well as the person who might have been the perpetrator. So it's really interesting how what you're saying makes absolute sense.
Yeah, I've actually done some really meaningful work with that exact subject, because I've done a lot of healing work on myself. Mm-hmm. And at some point, I started traveling back in my memories and exploring alternative versions of my past. And I saw other things that could have happened that would have, I mean, I can only say that it was healing to find out about some of the other versions, because I had such resentment over certain things that happened. But then when I went back and I looked at the different versions of that same aspect of my life and saw that there were several different ways things not just could have happened, but did happen on different timelines, it was the combination of all those experiences really helped me to go to a whole new level of self-love and understanding and self-acceptance. So I went back and I saw relationships that I had rejected and pushed away, and I was able to merge with the memories of a version of myself that allowed those relationships to occur. And I felt whole months and years of the ripple effect of those relationships merging into my consciousness and giving me some piece that had been missing. And that made me a more complete person. So yes, there are extraordinary things that you can do. Some people do this through a form of self-hypnosis. I've learned how to do it in kind of a dream state because I'm able to operate there very consciously. But anyone can learn how to access these kinds of things through a focused meditation or a visualization. And when you do these kinds of things, you're being guided by your higher self.
I teach it in a more cognitive way. I teach it through rational emotive behavioral therapy. But yes, I do agree that altogether it's a very spiritual, engaging process to just let go. One along the lines of, you know, you were talking about all the different series that you've written about and the world that might have been. One that really caught my eye was the series, the soon-to-be 7-piece series. You've got it currently for a 6-piece series on DNA. And I want to read you. I mean, obviously, it was such a rich series that it was difficult. I mean, it's wonderful, but one piece that caught my attention was this, and let me read it. It says, in summary, what is awakening in our DNA is a connection to many energy loops that contain a resonance of shared memory. These loops of shared memory connect us with an ocean of new knowledge and the understanding of holographic unity to the consciousness in the universe, and the more we remember, the more we awaken. I thought that was, incredible, because it kind of almost goes along the lines of this that we're talking about, remembering and resonance where we are in the spirit world in various places. But tell me a little bit more about your experience and all the discoveries you've made about the DNA.
Well, I've remembered a lot, and it's not just memories of past lives, which may or may be a part of anyone's experience of awakening, but for me personally, I've had a lot of experiences with remembering things from the whole history of the Earth and even the history of the galaxy. And I've come to understand that DNA has the ability to record what is happening in the field around it into ever wider segments of reality. So your DNA is recording what's happening inside your body, and it's also recording what's happening in the dynamics of relationships and the field around you and the entire world, and then into wider and wider segments of reality and spectrums of reality. So DNA has an ability, it's almost like an antenna that vibrates with the subtle vibrations of everything that is happening around it, and it holds those vibrations as records. And a big reason why we haven't been able to access the living records of our own bodies is because of the polarity of masculine and feminine energy. So I went through an initiation process which was guided by higher beings and also extends out of the teachings of the ancient mystery schools in Egypt and other places that facilitated a transcendence of the polarity of masculine and feminine energy. And it's something that is a very big part of our awakening, although I think more training and instruction is needed to help the masses really understand this and to go there. But it is part of our potential to transcend the polarity of masculine and feminine energy. And when the resonances of male and female are aligned and held in equality in a person's consciousness, it begins to unlock a whole new relationship between the consciousness and the living records of the body. And I would also say that this hidden relationship between consciousness and DNA and multidimensional memory is also very connected with having a sacred and conscious relationship with water and with the living water and the frequency of water as a universal frequency of memory. So I've also come to understand water as being a living symbol for the universal spiritual field that holds and contains our memories.
That's really interesting because, as you know, you might have come across the work of Dr. Sakamoto, I believe.
Dr. Emoto, yes.
Emoto, of saying "I love you" to the water and so forth. And obviously, it's the resonance that's carried in there. But what's interesting is when I read that article, I already did. I'm a graduate of the Silver Mind Control, and there's a technique where you hold the bottle of water and you project your own energy into it to revitalize you and so forth. But when I read that study, I started charging my water with love and gratitude over a piece of marble that would carry the resonance, and that's what I drink. But it's really interesting when you said that, because it's very healing, and it's also it helps you in terms of alignment and groundedness. So I give a great deal of validity to that. One thing you just said in there, though, that I'd like you to touch a little bit more on is the feminine and masculine. And along those lines, I picked up also from your website, you say when the male and female brain are listening to each other and supporting each other, there is peace. It is that simple. Now here's the part that I'm kind of not getting clear on that, because what are you referring to, the feminine and the masculine within oneself? Is it, say, a side of the brain? Is it left and right brain? Say more about that.
Well, the brain is really interesting because a part of the left brain mirrors the right brain, and a part of the right brain mirrors the left brain. There is a mirroring effect there. And so, in a way, you have two brains. If we were to describe the right brain as being predominantly feminine in its qualities of consciousness, and the left brain being predominantly masculine in its qualities of consciousness and its attunements to universal creative energy, then each one of those brains is not, it's not like you have half a female brain and half a male brain. It's almost like holographically you have two brains that are overlapping each other, because the female side is a whole brain. The male side is the whole brain. It's just that there is some degree of brain field segregation into a kind of a polarity. Now those polarities can be perfectly balanced, or they can be self-identified as, you know, I am the male, I am the female, where if you are identifying with yourself as only male and the feminine energy is objectified, then your brain is not balanced. And the same goes the other way. If you identify with yourself as female and you objectify the male energy, then your brain is not whole and integrated either. Because the resonances of male and female, of the divine feminine and the divine masculine, are whole and complete within the structure of our DNA. There is a place inside of all of our cells and all of our DNA that contains the hidden, dormant balance of divine union energy. It's just our consciousness has been misaligned with that part of the core of who we are. And so all of the mystery school teachings taught that the masculine has an inner feminine, the feminine has an inner masculine, and that our bodies carry an attunement to these different qualities of creative energy in the universe. The female form anchors a certain kind of energy for the community. It anchors a resonance of divine feminine energy. The male form anchors a resonance of divine masculine energy for the community. And we were meant to actually share the resonance of the body and hold frequency in a way that's unconditional, non-polarized, and integrated with your inner counterpart. So I remember an experience I had. It was probably the first time I had this experience. It wasn't the last, but it was very significant for me. I found myself kind of meditating with this woman that I was very connected with on a soul level, and she had a very wonderful strength to share the resonance of her form. She was a keeper of frequency, just like I am a keeper of frequency. And I could actually feel her presence activating an awareness of my inner womb. And so as I attuned to the hologram of my own soul's inner female form, it began to facilitate a process whereby I was able to experience a rising of the female Kundalini energy, such that I was able to release attachment to the female form externally, no longer objectifying that form or having any attachment to the female polarity outwardly, and it caused the male part of my polarized consciousness to snap back into alignment with the feminine part of the Kundalini energy. And at that point, the masculine and feminine resonance of my own consciousness moved into alignment with the core frequency of the soul as a whole being. And then I was able to receive the most incredible downloads of consciousness from the soul. I literally had a vision of the moment when my soul was created and birthed into form in the higher dimensions when this occurred. So it was a very dramatic experience for me that unfolded over a period of days.
Imagery-wise, what did that look like? And I'm just curious because I personally have recollections of walking through a ring of fire, and I've never been able to relate to what that could have been.
Well, I was actually at Burning Man when all of this happened. So I was out in the desert and I was wandering around and I was having different experiences with different people, and I was also doing readings for people and healing work. And so I was very activated by everything around me, and I think being in that kind of environment where there are a lot of people coming together as keepers of frequency, and it's very easy to find a reflection of yourself in others around you that are open to that kind of reflectivity between souls and that kind of soulful rapport between hearts and minds. And so it was a very activating place to go through this particular rite of passage.
Fascinating. So, along the lines of resonance, one of the things that comes to mind, and I've heard the word polarity a couple of times as it relates to feminine and masculine, but then there's also negative and positive polarity. How does that play in?
Well, here you're speaking about the difference between polarity and duality. You can have polarity, and there is an element of duality that exists within the polarity. But if your polarities are balanced, if there is a balance being expressed between those polarities without a power struggle, then we're not really talking about light and dark. You know, so duality can be in the form of light and dark, or, you know, to go a little bit further, you could have two sides that both see themselves as light, even though they are in contrast to each other and are in a power struggle with one another. So both sides could be dark, but see themselves as light, or not self-identify with themselves as being dark. You know, they're just two different sides of a duality. You know, so I would say that even though there are many forms of duality in the world, and you certainly have that between many different religions and cultures and races, there are all kinds of forms of duality that are based upon prejudice. If we actually healed the separation and duality between the masculine and feminine energy, then you would see a vibration of peace enter into human consciousness that would be so healing that it would begin to support people to very easily move out of prejudice in any form, because we would have this other resonating form of consciousness that we could align with that would just feel so much better.
So, on a practical, everyday occurrence, how is it that we, may put that into place? Can you bring in any type of, anything come to mind that could illustrate this as an example for everyone?
Well, maybe more what you're asking here is, how is all of this going to be resolved?
Not so much as in resolve, but here's what I run into. A lot of people hear these words, and to them the concepts Sound good? But that when it comes to what I know the yes, but how? How do I put that into into my life? How do I make that be part of my life? How do I assimilate that? Is my question. In other words, can you give a simple example of, say, for instance, in your own life where a particular incident might have happened and you sort of became aware of it? For example, here's one that I noticed you had in your website. You talked about when you had just moved, I believe, to California, and all of a sudden, I guess it's you and your wife might have been bickering or something, and suddenly you realized that this harmony was not really created by the two of you, but when you did a little bit of meditation, that there was something off of the top of a roof, for instance. So my question is, how is it
well, you're talking about the issue of frequency control, yeah, because there are
frequency control.
There are various forms of frequencies that are being used to try to create disharmony and disrupt people in a wide variety of ways. I have felt these in many of our cities. I've psychically observed them and remote viewed to observe how these technologies are being rolled out and used. So there are frequencies being pumped out in a lot of different places that it's a frequency that has a subtle effect on human consciousness, and it can feel like an assault to your consciousness. Some part of you may not be able to consciously understand what's happening. You may feel agitated and you don't know why. You may feel irritable or angry or upset, and that feeling comes from being violated, because our inner psychic space, our inner senses are being violated. And part of what these frequencies are designed to do is to make it really unpleasant for people to open their psychic abilities. That's part of the intent behind it. So there are so many psychics that have been tapped by government programs, and I think sometimes the people behind these programs want to have a monopoly on psychic power and ability, and then to make it very difficult for other discerning people to open their inner senses and to see what's going on behind the scenes. And so they send out these frequencies that, like I said, are very violating to the inner senses. It makes it feel not so good to be open and vulnerable and sensitive and aware. But I have experienced, counteracting these things, an angelic presence that has come in to provide assistance from the angelic realms to create a pathway for people to open their psychic abilities in a way that is protected and safe, where the resonance of these frequencies cannot have their intended effect. So I started channeling some messages from Archangel Michael and the angelic councils that are working on this particular project, and for several years now they have been increasing the presence of the blue ray as a form of protection to create a pathway into the angelic realms for people to open their inner senses into these pathways of energy, so that we can bypass all of the psychic sort of pollution in the atmosphere from these frequencies and from just astral pollution and negative vibes that people just don't want to deal with when they're opening their inner senses. So yes, it is possible now to align with this form of angelic assistance, to invoke it, to receive it, and to be supported, so that we just don't have to settle for being violated in this way.
And that's kind of the core of where we are at the moment, in terms of not recognizing how many ways are we being violated. that's sort of the cat that's just beginning to get out of the bag. And some people have a sense of resistance to even acknowledging that there is an issue. But threading what you just said back to where we were earlier in terms of the masculine and the feminine, what I noticed about that same story, and you're right on the particular story, down the road, once you became aware of these infringing frequencies, then once you had this realization of what it is, you talk about how you spend some time through the forgiveness process of the feminine and masculine to kind of get yourself settled back in tune and whatever else you did. So
right. Well, these kinds of experiences happen in more than one way, because there were the frequencies that were technological in nature, and I was able to identify the presence of that kind of the technological frequency of interference, and to remote view back to its source and to see that there were these transmitters on the roofs of buildings that were just beaming this stuff out into the city. And then there were other experiences where I became aware of interference just from astral entities. I remember one time I was in a very intense, heated argument with my ex, and we were kind of shocked at what was coming up, and it just felt that like there was a disruption happening. It just seemed like there was a more intense polarity there than normal. And I shifted out of body that night, and I became aware of this entity that had entered into the house, and it was really feeding fears and feeding all of us with negativity, and playing upon the lack of forgiveness or understanding or empathy that did exist to some extent, and it was just getting amplified. And once I saw what was going on, I was like, oh, okay, now it's clear there's interference going on. Sometimes when people are having fights, there are astral entities that are sort of egging it on and trying to reinforce the separation, because they're feeding off of that energy, they're feeding off of the fear. Maybe it's kind of a power trip to play that role. They live within those frequencies in one way or another, and so they need those frequencies to be there because it's like a home for them. So we were able to clear that entity and come back to a space of harmony, and yes, forgiving the masculine and feminine, forgiving the separation between the two, forgiving ourselves. Yes, forgiveness is a very, very powerful instrument that can bring things back into balance.
Say just a little bit, and I know that everybody handles this a little differently, but say just a little bit about the clearing process of something like that. If anybody were to recognize, an entity, say for instance, lagging behind or meandering around.
I would say that, for one, you don't have to be psychically aware of, seeing the entity or discerning exactly what it's doing. If you feel disempowered, then it's because you're giving your power away. We all have a core center of power. We all have a place, a position where we are standing in a position of alignment with our higher selves, where we are within the container of God's peace and the peace of the angelic presence. And if you are feeling disempowered, it could be for several reasons. It could be because you are attached to a person or an outcome, or to being right in a space of duality with someone. Or it could be because of fear, or it could be because you are placing your power outside of yourself in some way. So you have to start asking yourself certain questions and evaluating what you're doing. The most important thing, I think, for most people, as a step towards coming back into your true center of power, is to let go of blame. You have to stop blaming others, stop blaming circumstances, and instead just take a look at where you're placing your focus of attention. Where you place your focus of attention, that's what you are going to magnetize to yourself. If you're focused on trying to win an argument, then you're going to draw to yourself more conflict that is, you know, a challenge for that part of you that's attached to being right or being viewed a certain way. When you let go of attachment to how people perceive you, when you let go of attachment to being right, when you surrender the need to be right, the need to look good, the need to always have the last word, you know, those kinds of things will bring you back to your center. You have to become detached, because it's only in a space of complete detachment that you can really align with the higher self and begin to receive your source of power and your inner strength directly from your God source, rather than trying to get energy and attention flowing to you from, you know, from a human source.
Or your ego even. One thing you said a minute ago when you started off talking, you talked about responsibility, and I picked up this statement also from your website that speaks a little bit about that. It says, we all have a certain amount of responsibility to help clear up the astral plane by clearing ourselves of fears and attachments, which is what creates part of the astral plane to begin with. We have made the earth and humanity a home for such entities for all over the local universe, because our resonance allows such beings to come and dwell here invisibly. Humanity's denial to oneness is a home for those who seek to hide in the illusion of separation with us.
Yeah, very true.
Let's talk about the illusion of separation, because we're essentially talking about unity, and obviously the flip coin of that is separation, and that's, I guess, obviously where duality comes in. So what do you want to say about?
Well, there's a lot of things that human beings don't want to see and don't want to be aware of. And so we project those things into a separate space. And we separate ourselves from awareness of a greater reality. Now, the astral plane, for example, doesn't have to be a place of duality necessarily. All of these different vibratory levels of reality between our plane of existence and source could all be perfectly clear, aligned with unconditional love, not polarized, and not in duality. It just so happens that we have created and manifested a certain range of vibrations slightly beyond our physical reality that are a home for energies that live in resonance with duality. They live in fear. They live in a realm where there are power struggles with us, because we are creating that with our thoughts. Now, part of that is part of the divine plan, because as humanity, we saw potential, or the spirit of humanity saw the potential that we could clear up a lot of this type of energy in the local universe by taking it on and going through certain experiences here that would draw and attract these kinds of entities and unresolved beings and wounded souls and lost souls and all of that, to draw that into the vortex of this reality, and then to heal and transmute the karma of those beings through our story of going into and through an age of darkness and then awakening into an age of light. So that's part of what's happening. But what I was saying about responsibility is that we all have to become aware of what kind of energies we're putting out into the universe. So, for example, you could have a person who is thinking thoughts of hatred towards gay people, for instance. somebody who's very prejudiced towards gays and who is hating them in their consciousness. Now, this person might not ever cross the line of being violent towards gays and lesbians.
Or even articulating it, for that matter.
Right. They might kind of keep it to themselves.
Yeah.
But they are contributing to an environment and a resonance of violence with their thoughts and their projections. And so the person on the other side of the world who is actually attacking people for being gay or murdering them or raping them or doing all kinds of acts of violence, the person who is hating in their consciousness is contributing to that. Somebody else is acting out what they are doing with their thoughts. Okay, and so there's a way in which people are responsible for what they're creating in the world, and even if they're not physically the one that's doing it, if they're supporting that kind of behavior with hatred and prejudice, then they're contributing to the environment of those things going on. And so one of the great insights that came out of the experience of 9/11, and I don't hear it talked about all that much, is that there's all of this pain and suffering that occurred, but there were also masses and masses of people around the world who realized, wow, if people don't take responsibility for their own hatred, then loads of people end up dying and suffering as a result of it, because that's what we saw happen in this outpictured way, where the whole world as one could see the ripple effect of really irresponsible behaviors and unchecked forms of prejudice in a person's consciousness. And so millions of people all shared and resonated with the same prayer, which is, let peace begin with me. And so there were people that said, let me remove from the environment of duality and fear and prejudice and conflict and violence any resonance of that coming from me. Let me take some of the juice out of that environment by reeling in any judgments I might have of other people, so that if I become more peaceful, then I am creating and contributing to an environment of peace and supporting a flourishing and an awakening of a peace culture in the world. So there are a lot of people who understand consciously now that we all are responsible for manifesting the entire world that we live in through our thoughts. That if you want to change the world, you start by changing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, one of physics or even metaphysics' greatest statements is your beliefs create your reality, and a lot of people don't quite grasp that the not only the essence, but how that can even work. So
right, but there are more people now today that do grasp that than there were at any other time in history. So
absolutely.
just even in the past year, there has been an awakening so dramatic that I can actually feel week to week changes in the collective reality because of the mass awakening that is occurring. Now, maybe not everyone that is experiencing this awakening is that sensitive, although I think a lot of people are feeling the acceleration, and they are feeling that humanity's resonance is changing. But there are enough people now that do understand it, that it is beginning to affect a paradigm shift in consciousness, where people realize that even though sometimes the effect of their decisions and their beliefs manifests slowly, you can make a decision that I want to experience this or that, and maybe the experience doesn't come to you right away, but then several weeks, months, years down the line, something happened exactly the way you described it, the way that you intended it for it to happen, and it's like, hey, wait a minute, I wished for this. This is amazing. This is exactly what I wished for. And you realize that, yes, you are actually creating a reality. Now, I would go a step further into the understanding that really we are not doing these things by ourselves. That there is a higher self involved, there are guides involved, there's a God presence that is orchestrating what's happening, and that we are co-creators with that. That there is a field of higher consciousness listening to our thoughts and prayers and responding to our intentions. But there's also very often a great refinement of our intentions that takes place, where what we conceptualize as the next experience, the next reality that we want to enter into is very often a dim reflection of what's actually in store. So sometimes us describing reality to ourselves and what we want to happen and envisioning it and dreaming about it is really us awakening to a more fully realized potential that has been seeded inside of us from birth, that the plan for our lives already exists in a certain form. Even though there are ways in which it gets tweaked along the way, still the seeds of potential that make up who you truly are have already been fully constructed as fully realized potentials from the soul level, placed inside of you, and along the way you have awakenings into that potential, and you realize, oh, you know what, I would really love to have this experience or that experience. And it's really you just becoming aware of something that's already in store. So we think that we are creating reality as if the plan for our lives just didn't exist yet and we're inventing it all as we go along. That's not really how it works.
Yeah.
We are co-creating, and there is a way in which our consciousness interacts with the level of consciousness that is creating things and mapping out our potentials into a life experience. But there's so much more to it than this concept of just, we create our own reality as if it's all coming from the egoic level of us.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I have a little bit of problem with when it comes to the law of attraction, because so many people get a little fixated over, I'm going to create this, I'm going to create the other, and I'm going to put it out there in the universe, and it's going to manifest, and it's like, whoa, that's a bit controlling.
There's a lot of illusion in those teachings. Yeah. And what I tell my students is that in terms of the law of attraction, it's great to have this understanding, this knowledge of how reality works. Your ego can abuse that knowledge. It's very easy. When the ego becomes aware that your desires and focusing on your desires has a certain degree of creative power, such that you can attract things to you by the focus of your desires. Once the ego has that knowledge, that can actually be very dangerous. You can become more intently focused on using this knowledge to consciously draw things to yourself that actually do not serve you. And so I always say that in order to master the law of attraction, we have to become aware of everything that we are attracting to ourselves in such a way that we are no longer victims, that we are aware of not just the things that we attract that come from desire, but also things that we attract to ourselves that reflect our resonance in other ways. People can attract things to them through their fears. People can attract relationship experiences to themselves because there's something unresolved about some part of their experience of relationships in some way, and so they want to have some way of trying to resolve something that feels unresolved. And so people often don't recognize that everything that is coming into their life is coming to them through the law of attraction. Instead, people want to say, oh, well, I'm just going to attract the good things, the nice things, you know, by focusing on those things, not realizing that all of the things that you attract that don't feel so nice and that don't feel good to you and that you might say are bad and things that you want to avoid, those are all things you're attracting to yourself as well. And if you don't pay attention to the things that you're attracting to yourself and why, that don't feel so good, or that are a challenge, or that you might tend to want to avoid, then this whole law of attraction, you create your own reality thing becomes a bit of a distraction. You know, you're not looking at the full spectrum of what you're putting out into the universe and attracting to you. So you have to be responsible for everything that you attract, whether it's something that feels good to you or not. You have to see it all as a reflection of yourself in some way and ask, okay, why did I need this and what is the gift in it?
Which takes us back to where we were a minute ago in terms of unity and separation, because if you're not at the center of your essence in balance, then you really have no understanding of what is it that you're attracting.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I think one of the reasons why the Ascended Master teachers and guides that I work with came to me with the whole School of Manifestation project is because they wanted to take people beyond these kind of law of attraction teachings. And that's why the very first course is allowing divine manifestation. So if you're ready to go beyond the law of attraction, then this is the next step. It's allowing divine manifestation. How can we allow the divine to manifest the gifts and blessings and grace and abundance that wants to enter our lives? How can we not block that? How can we align with what the divine has in store for us instead of thinking that we, at this egoic level, need to somehow be in charge of creating it all?
You just hit a nerve for me, and that is, and I don't mean the, the allowing part, because a lot of people don't understand what the allowing part means, and I contextualize that really simply in my book, for instance. To me, an allowing is almost a yes and a no. When you're allowing, you're saying yes to it, you're letting it in, you're being expanded. When you're saying, you know, something comes to your life, you know, you wreck down the freeway and it's like, you know, there went my car, and you say no to it, you're not allowing. So you're saying no to it. But it happened. The universe brought it. Whether you ask for it or not, it's here. So it's about that, you know, letting the no, or what you're perceiving as a no, and turning it into a yes and saying it happened, and switching the paradigm. So to me, that's a little bit of a nerve, simply because I focus in trying to get people to understand really the essence of allowing. It doesn't mean that you have to like it, or that you know, or that you was something that you wanted it, but it's just something that came, and it's here.
Right. And here I think we're talking about not just allowing as in accepting unconditionally all that occurs without resisting it, forming an attachment to it, running away from it, avoiding it. We're talking also about the difference between the kind of logic, linear mind process that we go through when we are planning our lives, which doesn't allow a lot of room for divine manifestation. You know, we have our checklist, we have our priorities, we have our list, our manifestation list, and there's all these things that we think that we need to do to fulfill our ambitions. And allowing is what you do when you realize that you are not the best planner of your own life. And you start to allow room for spirit to enter the equation more, and you start to get out of the way. And so you stop plotting and planning and strategizing to get the things that you want, and instead you just move into being grateful for all that you have and giving thanks. And then You may share your desires and intentions and wishes with the universe, with God, your higher self, your guides, but then you let it go. And you don't try to make it happen. You don't try to force things into being, but instead see what wants to happen. Maybe what God wants for you is something vastly different than what you think you want for yourself. We think we know so much about what would make us happy, but when you start to get this allowing piece, you find out that God is full of surprises. And really miraculous things can happen in your life that you didn't expect and yet are more perfect than you could have ever imagined. So that's the kind of life I'm living, because I'm having an experience of divine perfection in my life because I am allowing it. I have to remember this quote that always stuck with me, that came to me from the Master Sai Baba. And the very first dream that I ever had with him, he came into my dream space and he said, perfection is not something you achieve, it's something you allow. And that one wisdom statement has become like a revelation gradually unraveling itself in my mind over the years. And I keep going deeper and deeper and discovering more and more layers of what that truly means, to allow perfection instead of trying to achieve perfection. So there's a lot of things that I used to try to achieve. I used to be on this path where I was trying to achieve enlightenment. There's a lot of people trying to achieve enlightenment, but you can't achieve enlightenment through self-will, because the very state of consciousness of becoming enlightened happens when you surrender your self-will. So trying to achieve enlightenment is actually counterproductive to the process of becoming enlightened.
Absolutely. I wrote a little phrase, in my book. It says, enlightenment is not this pinnacle of awakened self. It is every step towards that pinnacle, because it's really the path. It's not this one instant where voila, there it is. But
right.
you also said something.
Let me just say something about this, because I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's a really important statement for those that are following this conversation and really are wanting to look deeper in what I'm saying here. That if you want to become enlightened, if you want to achieve enlightenment, then let go of that as a goal or a time frame or a concept of how you're going to get there. Don't try to figure out how you're going to become enlightened. Don't look for how. Instead, make service to others your priority. Make self-purification your priority. If you focus on self-purification, becoming more accountable, becoming a better person in every way that you can, developing your spiritual practice, and then focusing constantly every day on how can I be of greater service? How can I love more unconditionally in the world and become greater love? If you focus on those things, that is going to take you on the most accelerated path towards your enlightenment. And it could happen in this life, it might not. It might not be your destiny to become enlightened, but you can enter a state of inner peace, and you can enter a path of grace by focusing on these things and making them a priority. And that is an enlightening experience, regardless of whether you become completely merged in God in this particular lifetime. It really doesn't matter, because once you've discovered truly the pathway as being that of the priorities that I mentioned, then you found the path, and you feel, you begin immediately to taste the victory of that path, no matter where you are at in the journey, no matter how long it takes you to get to any particular initiatory experience of that. And there are many initiations on You know, it's a path of enlightenment. It's a path of initiation. There are many major and minor initiations and spiritual experiences that are enlightening on that path. It's not just like there's one moment when you become enlightened and then that's it. It keeps going and going and going and going.
One thing I will say, that once you get the taste of what being in the path is, and get some sense of realization, and it suddenly becomes synchronistic with the universe, then there's no turning around. You want more and more and more, so it really becomes easier in a way to keep yourself on track and to keep yourself aligned once you kind of figure out that dance, so to speak. I start my day every day saying thank you for the opportunity of being of service to others. To me, gratitude, just to be here is vital. But it's very invigorating. It's very centering. It's very, it just fuels me. So gratitude is, to me, I think, one of the greatest gifts that one can grab hold of in the path of getting, the ascension process.
Right, and I can tell you personally that I have healed so much through gratitude, even experiences of pain. I remember a time when I was having headaches, and I would wake up every morning, and it was a part of me that was in resistance to the experience that I was having of this particular job that I had. I just hated getting up and going to work every morning and standing out in the cold and waiting for the bus and being there super early and living in this apartment where you could hear everything happening through all the walls and you just never got any good sleep. I just remember feeling so much resistance, and the moment that I started being grateful for that part of me that was in resistance, it began to relieve that pressure inside of my mind, inside of my head. And I just said, thank you for this lesson. Thank you for all that you are teaching me. I was saying that to the part of me that felt trapped and stuck in this experience. And as soon as I started being grateful for that part of my soul's experience, instead of resenting the part of me that was stuck in pain, it just turned my whole life around. And then I was able to start to experience my present moment work experience differently as well. I was able to start getting guidance from the angels about how to make the most of it and how to really be present with everyone around me and to just be the most loving person I could. And then that completely changed everything.
And that makes perfect sense to me, because what's really happening through pain is a great catalyst for learning.
Yes.
But what's happening to pain is essentially you're using it as a blocking mechanism. You're blocking the energy. You're saying no instead of saying yes. And so the moment that you said yes, thank you for whatever, I don't like it, but thank you.
Yeah.
Then that was the switch, and then that's when things sort of turned around. So I can so relate to that. I personally avoid looking at pain as a how, in other words, I don't skew pain. I don't like it, but I've learned my lesson not to say no to it. Okay, it hurts. Here it is. Brace yourself, and just go right through that needle. Because once you do, wow, the opening at the other end is just amazing.
Right. And another thing to remember about dealing with pain is that your presence is part of God's presence and part of the divine presence. The divine is the source of all love and healing energy and knowledge. And so if you are avoiding, running away from, diverting your attention away from pain, trying to just numb it or escape from the sensation, the experience of the body itself, then, or to disassociate from some part of your experience. It doesn't have to be physical pain. It could be emotional. It could be mental. If you're trying to just disassociate, then you're actually removing part of God's presence from your human experience, and you are creating separation through that focus of attention. To be really present with oneself is to give yourself the gift of God's presence, because your presence is part of what completes the circuit.
Which I think it's a real good segue into where some of the things that we'd like to cover, Saryon, in what you just said about sort of tuning out or numbing. You know, there's so many things in this technological world these days that we can utilize to numb, you know, texting and videoing and, you know, you name it, food, sugars. I mean, how the list is endless of how many ways can we numb ourselves to feel pain, to feel joy, to just the experience of life. And so my question to that is, you know, how did we allow ourselves to get here? How did, you know, here we are in this sort of cornered ourselves and separated from spirit. But what happened?
Well, I think you're getting into a whole nother area, which may be part of the subject of the next interview, since we are going to be doing another one. And that's the denial pattern. You know, what are we running away from? And why do we spend so much time with distractions? Why are we creating the distractions? Why is the media that we have literally designed to keep us distracted? You know, if we didn't have denial, if we weren't trying to look for distractions, then we wouldn't manifest a media that is based upon creating distractions for us. You know, we would create reality in a whole different way without this denial pattern. So that's a fascinating topic, and I know I have been doing a lot of self-examination continually about when I find myself distracting myself and, you know, asking, well, what am I distracting myself from? What is this really about? You know, and then seeing the potentials that I'm overlooking and then taking responsibility for those, and then getting on track with what my soul really wants and needs me to do to fulfill my purpose. So there are times when distractions are very counterproductive, and then there are other times when it is healing to give ourselves a break. And you have to find balance, because certainly, you know, I could be very easily distracted with things that are educational as well, because there's so many things on the internet that I would love to look at just as a source of information. But that becomes distracting if I'm spending too much time on it. If it becomes a place that I'm going instead of going somewhere else and doing something more meaningful with my time, you know. So, but there is a balance, you know. We can always be aware of what the balance is if we have the intention to.
So let's go back, being that I can't get a sense of time at the moment. Are you okay for just a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go back at the beginning where we started with DNA and recap some of the things that are you know, literally changing in our bodies and so forth. I also have an understanding that there's a higher level of truth arriving, and that is coming in waves of new children who are bringing their light and love to raise the level of consciousness and frequency in this world. Do you have anything to say about them?
Well, many of the children that are being born today, and I don't know if this is true of all children being born today, but I would say that increasingly more and more of them are literally not the same species. They're not the same species of human as the species that we were born as. You know, people like you and I, although, you know, we can debate that as well, because certainly, you know, we represent a different generation, an older generation that has come in to change the resonance of humanity, but we're doing it differently. We were sort of born into the old matrix and are changing from the inside, and then you have the children of a whole new matrix of consciousness being born now. And there are many different kinds, different waves of children, different groups that are coming in to bring different kinds of gifts and resources to us energetically as a part of this new web of group consciousness. But the main difference between the old species versus the new species is the resonance of consciousness, the alignments that exist and that are intact in the consciousness of the new beings. So I would say that in terms of an evolutionary change, the change at this time has more to do with resonance than anything else. Now, eventually we're going to see global shifts take place hundreds, thousands of years from now, where there are actual changes in the appearance of human beings, where our physical characteristics will change along with our resonance. This first global shift is primarily a change in resonance. It's not a change in the physical appearance of the species. The new humans are going to look basically the same as the old species. They're just going to have a different resonance in their consciousness, and they're going to be using more of their brains. Their chakras are more opened. They're more attuned to these collective fields of consciousness that are anchored through the human chakra system. And there will be increased capacities for holding love and light as a frequency in human consciousness.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have observed from these gifted children is, you know, that capacity to not so much express the love, but just simply to radiate. And I think, and this is just a sense of opinion, that a lot of the changes that we're currently seeing, not just technically, you know, the integration of spirit is them bringing forward that particular fifth and sixth density awareness, in where part of what's happening in whether it's government or you know, abroad, you know, the systems are colliding or collapsing, is just that the work of these children, or the work of this generation altogether, making that happen. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I have had a lot of experiences with new children coming in. Sometimes when I have traveled out of body, I've contacted large groups of these new children that are interlinked as souls. They could be incarnated in many different places physically in the world, but on the inner plane they still gather together as a soul group. And I sometimes have gone around and visited these new children and spoken with them and engaged them in a kind of a rapport energetically with the heart space and through the angelic presence, because we are all linking consciousness in various ways. And the work of, you know, people like myself is helping to create a bridge for the old consciousness to integrate with the new consciousness. You know, and we are part of that bridge. So sometimes I'll have interactions with these beings where, like, the soul of one of these new children, that it maybe is a familiar soul that knows me, might come and hang out and be in my field for a while before incarnating. I've had a number of experiences of that occurring. I had one experience where one of these soul children that was just hanging around in my field once invited me to come into the womb of the pregnancy, where this soul's body was being formed. And so I found myself out of body, and then this soul took me right into the womb of this pregnant woman, and I was there inside the womb seeing the fetus, and the soul was showing me, look at how I have brought these new geometries in consciousness into the womb with me. And I saw these sacred geometries there that were connected with the body and the consciousness and the DNA. And the child was saying, because of these geometries, I am not ever going to fall asleep and lose consciousness as I become an adult. I will retain my Christ consciousness from childhood all the way through into adulthood without losing touch with it. So
wow,
more and more of the children that are coming in are like that.
That sounds so familiar. It's amazing that you would bring that particular example up, because I have this vivid recollection of being in the womb with a twin sister. Obviously, I don't have a twin sister in this lifetime, so I'm recollecting a prior life. But it was so visceral, and what was amazing is although we were twins, we were in two separate amniotic fluid, sacs, because we weren't identical. But I remember almost like a holding of the hands. And what's interesting is that I've encountered that soul here in this 3D experience and recognized her. She's incarnated as a female once again. And when I touched her hand, I met her, and when we touched hands, it was an amazing experience. It didn't make any, nothing for her, but for me, I felt like I was spiraling down into this sense of dizziness, because it was like an immediate soul recognition. And I almost felt, like, hold on to something, because I'm going down the rabbit hole. It was very, I thought I was, having a psychedelic experience there for a minute. It's like, okay, what is that? But that was an incredible experience, and what you described is so similar to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty amazing that we have these memories, and would you say that is the DNA aspect of spirit just coming back into life, or into, how would you explain these things?
Well, DNA is multidimensional, and there are many hidden dimensions to DNA. There are many different psychic blueprints or etheric blueprints that can be connected to DNA that are part of a divine plan that extends into a structure of reality beyond just the way in which DNA is the building blocks of the biological form itself. So DNA is a structure for history, and there are many different subtle blueprints attached to your DNA that are connected to and a part of the soul as well. So I've actually traveled out of body and had an experience of folding inward to become conscious of the being that projects me as a personality into form, and I have followed that beam back into the chamber of the soul as a multidimensional being, and I saw that the memory that we have on that level, the Akashic records of the soul itself, is in some way made of DNA. Our souls are also genetic beings, but in a different form. I saw the DNA of the soul as being made of loops and symbols that contain resonances of memory. And I saw that the biological form of DNA was interlinked and was an aspect of this, that the two are interconnected. Both are different forms of DNA, and both are a part of what DNA is multidimensionally. And there are all kinds of different blueprints that can be involved in creating who we are and different kinds of relationship experiences that we have. So yes, we all incarnate in groups. You know, there are souls that we have a very strong rapport with. We come down here together. We enter in through different vehicles, and we get split up in that way physically, but our particles, our energy are still entangled in various ways. And that can even happen through the experience of both being in the womb at the same time. It doesn't have to even be exactly at the same time either. There could just be a connection there. I can think of one experience I had where I became aware that a particular person that I knew, that her physical body was created from the same elemental blueprint. So it's like our physical forms were made from the same blueprint. Now, we're absolutely not genetically related, but there was a connection between the blueprints for our physical forms that was etheric in nature, that was created in a higher realm. And what happened is I found that because we were sort of cut from the same cloth in a way, or came out of the same mold, there was a way in which we were entangled that was very highly specific, such that if I expressed or felt love and appreciation for her form, then that love went right back into my own form, so that I experienced it like I was loving my own body. And so meeting this person and seeing them as a mirror of myself in that way, not just seeing, but like vibrationally experiencing them as a mirror, there was a quantum holographic effect. Loving this person on the level of appreciating their physical presence, it healed my own relationship to the body and gave me a whole different experience of self-love and self-acceptance of my body. And I was able to feel the frequency of my own love on the level of physical reality. So that was a unique relational experience that happened because of one of these etheric blueprints that was connected to and attached to our DNA, and the DNA being the antenna that holds and broadcasts the frequency of these subtle blueprints.
Touch a little bit there when you just said my love to the body, because one of the things that I work a lot with just personally is detachment from the body. In other words, I'm not my body's in me, so to speak. In other words, I inhabit the soul through the body, but I'm not particularly attached to it. But yet, I have a love for the body. So talk a little bit about the subtle differences of those two, if you would.
Well, how would you describe the difference between the two again?
Meaning, in other words, you were talking about how when this other person, was becoming a mirror, or you were looking into the reflection of this person and bouncing back the love, you could feel the love physically, and it gave you a lot of self-love. But at the same time, I'm thinking in terms of, okay, self-love can also be, to go to an extent and be kind of it becomes egoic. And so when you have detachment, sometimes the extreme of that is carelessness, or so obviously back to the centering or balance. But my question was more in terms of experiencing self-love from the position of neither extremes.
Right. Well, you're talking about experiencing self-love as opposed to vanity and glamour, the glamour of a physical form. I've seen people that have a kind of an extreme experience in that way, where they are so focused on their appearance and their looks and obsessing about it, either because they're obsessing with their flaws or because they think that they look really good and they are focused upon that as if that's their most important quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for people to reach a place of self-acceptance, unconditional self-acceptance. But I would say that the experience of self-love, when you're loving your physical body, I'm talking about the experience of a flow of energy where you're really experiencing God's love for you on the level of the physical body. It's not so much about you being focused on loving the way you look, loving your own appearance. It's more because usually our appearance we focus a lot on the shape of our forms or the way our face looks or certain physical characteristics. But this experience of self-love for me was about embracing the whole form and the resonance, the unique resonance of the whole form through love. Because if I compared the differences and similarities that I have with this person that was a mirror for me, there were lots of ways in which we looked different. Our physique was very similar, and there was a similar resonance to the blueprint of the body, but actually our faces, our hair, and many other characteristics were very different. So for me, it was about loving the unique resonance of the body. It was a love that was inclusive of the way in which this unique form creates a frequency that is also unique. And so I was loving and appreciating both. And I also think that having the ability to laugh at yourself, to smile at yourself, to compliment yourself without obsessing about the way that you look. People can obsess about their looks in a negative way. They can obsess about their looks in a way that is just pure vanity. And I think that what we're really talking about here is just not obsessing about the way you look, because you're detached to the way that you look, and yet you also can care about your appearance too, because your appearance is part of the gift that you give to others. It's part of the gift of your presence. If you don't take care of your appearance, then you're denying people part of the gift of showing potentially who you are as love. Because if you're not loving yourself and you're not recognizing the gift that you are as a physical being to others, when you show yourself to be unconditionally loving of the self, then yeah, there's something missing.
Yeah, I've often seen that people that portray that particular persona have a great deal of shame, and so they've kind of let themselves go or let themselves behind, and what happens is they're doing themselves a disservice because they're not fully coming forward in their soul essence, and that love is somehow blocked, and there is a little bit, not just a little bit, but a great deal of disconnection and separation there, and so essentially we go back to the essence of unity and separation versus being in alignment.
Right, and actually having shame for one's physical body, or being ashamed of our sexuality or of nakedness, those kinds of feelings actually do block us from embodying the full presence of God in our lives, and the full presence of the soul. It actually does create a block in the full manifestation energy even of the soul, because of the way in which you are inhibiting your full presence. I remember when I got rid of my shame about the physical body and about being naked, how liberating that was and how freeing that was, and how it actually led me to an experience eventually where I felt the presence of God coming back into the lower chakras and even into the sexual organs. And I mean, that was an incredibly blissful, beautiful experience to feel like, wow, this is how we were made. We were made to actually experience the presence of God in our whole bodies and even also in our sexuality. But the shame of the physical body, the shame of our nakedness and of our sexuality, that inhibits us from bliss.
Yeah. Well, and to a great extent, that shame creates, like you say, a block, but it creates a chakra block, and where so much of the energy you're not able to receive, like you say, the grace of God, because the chakra is just completely blocked.
Right.
And
when I speak of God also, I use that term a lot. When I speak of God, I'm not speaking about, the concept of God being male. I'm speaking of the God as simultaneous, because I see God as both male and female as one. And I'm also speaking of source, the source of all light and all life and all love and creation, the source of the hologram. If you accept the possibility that our whole universe is a holographic construct that is being projected from a source, and to me, God is that source. It's not an abstract concept. For me, there is a creator consciousness that I've had experiences with, that I've experienced communion with in various ways, that I've had transcendental experiences and mystical experiences of connection with. It's not a concept of God based upon the religions. Although I would say that my mystical experiences of God have helped me to understand where the inspiration came from behind the world's religions. And I also understand things about our natural birthright and human potential to have what you might term a religious experience. My first kind of mystical vision or experience, I called that a religious experience before I knew really what a mystical experience was. Because I was, at the time, I'd been raised Catholic, and I thought, oh, this was my first religious experience, because that was the only word that I had for it at the time.
It's really more of a sacred.
Yeah.
It's more of a sacred experience as opposed to a religious experience.
Right, but it was, for me, it was a vision of Jesus, and I was raised Catholic, so yes, it was, for me, I looked at that as a religious experience. Of course, that was just the beginning of such a wide range of different kinds of mystical experiences, and becoming a channel, I experienced these kinds of mystical states on a more regular basis through the channeling experience. Working with angels, working with the beautiful divine love and light of, our interplane teachers like the Master Jesus, but also many others, Mother Mary and Saint Germain. Actually, those three being the three that overlight the School of Manifestation.
Speaking of the School of Manifestation, what have you got in store? What's going on there at the moment? Anything that you'd like to report to others? Anything that you'd like them to check out?
Yeah, well, if you go to the website, theschoolofmanifestation.com, you can read about the school, how it came into being, what it is. There's a link at the top on the menu that says about the school, and then there's online courses. So if you go to online courses, you can see that there are several different courses. There are a couple that are available that were recorded last year, and those can be purchased. You can sign up for them and go through them as a week-by-week experience. There's a 5-week course with a 6-week bonus week. There's a 7-week course that comes after it that also has an 8th week. Each of the bonus weeks have a full 2-hour video presentation. And these courses consist of channeled writings and classes that are available as a recording. So you listen to the recording. There's question and answer that happens at the end that was from the original group that took these courses. And I hear from people all the time that these courses are, for them, just as powerful as, you know, if I think what the original group experienced when it was a live course. I do have one live course right now that people can participate in, and there's no prerequisite, and that's the Defense Against the Dark Arts course. It's a 7-week course, but I'm taping it only one class per month. So there is going to be 7 classes or 7 recordings all together in the end. Right now I've done 2 of the recordings, so anyone that registers for that, and I've made this particular course very low cost for people that are newcomers to my work, so it's only $112, and when you register for that, you can go ahead and listen to the first 2 classes. The very first one, we set up your protection grid, and we teach you how to work with, to create and work with and invoke a protection grid. And then it goes on from there to address other insights about psychic self-defense and transforming duality. I approached this particular issue from both of those, the defense aspect of things and also the personal responsibility and accountability aspect of, you know, how did you attract this experience of psychic attack to you? What does it mean? What is the gift in it? How is this showing you a reflection of yourself? You know, I don't think that this would be a very effective teaching if it only taught you, you know, techniques of defense from, you know, what's out there psychically. And I do know a lot about what's out there, and I do teach people about a very wide range of things because I have that ability to go into the unseen and to travel out of body and to get a sort of angel's eye view of what we are dealing with in the invisible realm around us. So I can tell you about these things and how to deal with them and how to use each experience of duality or conflict in your life to get transformation out of it and to become more empowered and more powerful and also more responsible and more enlightened. So there are 2 classes now that people would listen to if they registered right now, and then they could participate in the other 5 that are left as a live teaching. So it'll go for, you know, another 5 months, and you can see if you go to the School of Manifestation website and you go to membership, you can see the courses. You can't access them unless you are registered and you have access to it, but you can see the different weeks there, and you can always see what week we are on with the Defense Against the Dark Arts by going to that link, and it'll show you how many classes have already been taped.
That sounds really exciting.
Right, and also you can read testimonials from the students. They're mostly of the first course. I don't think I've put testimonials up yet of the other courses, but if you read the testimonials from that first course, the Allowing Divine Manifestation, that is an amazing course, and I think that the benefits that people receive from that have continued to unravel and unfold long after that course. I know I still am going deeper into the teaching that came through because it was a teaching for me as well. You know, I was channeling this from masters that were as much a teacher to me as they were to the students that I was channeling these things for. So I'm right there with people, you know, as a student of these teachings, and I get to have kind of a front row seat to the process of bringing it through.
I don't think you ever stop being a student. Even
Right,
if you teach, you know, you're always, you know, learning something or some new level of height into, you know, the same path.
Right.
So what do we have in store next time? We've talked about another session. What do you think that we should, you know?
Well, there's a lot to explore if we want to explore some of the hidden architecture of the human mind I think that would be an interesting subject, because there's certainly things that I have learned through traveling inwardly and through inner self-knowledge that I think would be very enlightening and empowering for people to learn about and discover. And it does give us some insights into potentials for humanity's awakening. And we could also talk about some of those potentials as well.
I think that sounds fantastic. So let's meet again.
Okay.
Anything you'd like to say to wrap this particular session? Any advice that you'd like to offer? Any suggestions?
As advice goes, I would say if you've listened to this whole interview, then thank you, and just keep being grateful for everything that you have. And don't forget to give thanks and to treat the people in your life as precious, precious souls on a courageous journey with you. Because even the people that are playing divisive roles in your life are people that on a soul level truly, truly love you, and you have magnetized these people into your life to play these roles for a reason, to help you heal and transform and grow and become greater love. So, you know, when you truly surrender to God, your enemies become your friends.
One thing that I tell some people is to enter into the realization that you're living in somewhat of an illusion, and that you don't always recognize what was it that you agreed upon in your higher self level. So if you can, you know, pull back the veil long enough to enter into that realization and to just open up to say, okay, let's learn. What is it that this is holding? Then what unfolds is probably pretty magnificent. So I thank you for meeting me here today. It's been fantastic, and I look forward to our next session. What you just talked about sounds really enticing and really different than most any material that I've ever heard, and I think that would be more, a lot richer than just about anything else that we could talk about, even though your site is so diversified. So we'll let those who have that are inquisitive in specific areas go there and check it out, and we'll just kind of keep, you know, trailing along this particular thread, and I'm delighted. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
All right.